we're a unique organization that we look at the environment in a holistic fashion: research, advocacy, land conservation, education. And little slide on each one. Some examples here of some of the research, a lot of it cutting edge that we've done. Circulation study of the bay went on for multiple years, using caged mussels to find dioxin, PCBs. We've been doing a lot of PFAS work lately in conjunction with the Brunswick Sewage District and on our own. Use our research to inform our advocacy, a lot of which revolves around migratory fish passage. Education, in-school visits have been cut short because of COVID. We just had our first Bay Day since the beginning of COVID, and it was awesome. A few weeks ago in Bodenham, 230 kids from 7 different schools out there doing hands-on environmental ed stuff like you see in the pictures here. That's really important because these are the folks that will be around tomorrow, not me. And then we protected, at this point, well over 1,300 acres of land, focusing on valuable wildlife habitat around the bay. And if you enjoy tonight's presentation or any others, and you have people that would like to see them, we do record them, thanks to Martin, who's our technical person here on the program, Martin McDonough. And on our home webpage, down in the right column under education, you'll see a speaker series video archive here. And this is just the beginning of the season, so most of you have probably gotten those yellow postcards, but if not, you can also under education on the home page, you can find this calendar here. And our next program will be on endangered species from Tara Thornton, who's Deputy Director of the Endangered Species Coalition, of which Friends of Miami Bay is a member. Now I'm going to introduce Seth, but I do want to say full disclosure here that Central Maine, Friends of Miami Bay has sued Central Maine Power in the past multiple years on a tower and light and radiation issue, and that personally, I am in federal court against Central Maine Power as well on a disability discrimination issue. So, having said that, Seth carries a Maine-based business, education, and policy leader. He's an avowed progressive. Seth ran 7 times for state legislature, winning each time in a district that voted twice for both Trump and LePage. During his service, Seth was elected House Majority Leader by his peers, and he's chaired several top legislative committees. Seth also co-founded Our Power, a Maine-based movement to replace the state's 2 large investor-owned electric utilities with a not-for-profit, consumer-owned, not government-owned utility that will focus on the state's climate goals, cutting costs, and improving reliability. For his policy achievements, Seth has received the Sierra Club Legislative Leadership Award, the Northeast Clean Energy Council's Maine Clean Energy Champion Award, President's Award from the Maine Development Foundation for Bipartisan Leadership on Jobs and Workforce Measures, the Maine Children's Alliance Giraffe Award, given to those who stick their necks out for kids, Prevention Award from the Maine Alliance to Prevent Substance Abuse, Clean Air Award from the American Lung Association of Maine, and Seth has been named Margaret Chase Smith Distinguished Maine Policy Fellow at the University of Maine. He holds a BA from Brown and a master's from Columbia University, and has been instrumental here in Bodenham in keeping our source-separated recycling program going. And with that, I'll thank Seth again for being here, and stop sharing and let Seth take over.
Thank you very much, Ed, and it's great to be with all of you. I see some wonderful familiar faces, and as well as some folks that I don't know so well. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about question 3, which we are all able to vote on now at your town office or city hall, wherever you live, using our no excuse absentee voting system. You can now vote on questions 1 through 8, and certainly question 3 any time now. So I hope you'll avail yourself of that opportunity and make sure to vote once you feel sufficiently informed. As Ed mentioned, I have been at this for a while, and I am very passionate about it. In fact, although I really enjoyed my career in the legislature, it's not really a career, but my service in the legislature, this felt important enough to leave that behind, to focus your time that I do have when I am not, working at my day job, to focus that time that I do have on this political effort and not legislative service. So with that, I will get right into it. While I'm sharing my screen, though, I should just mention, Ed, I really can take very little credit for Bodenham's source separated recycling program. You may have been thinking of another Barry when you mentioned that, but lots of folks here in this room have been helpful as well. And we're here to talk about question 3. The Pine Tree Power Company is what we will create if we vote yes on 3. I could spend all day talking about, Central Maine Power and its, the problems that it has caused. Ed alluded to that, but that's not what I'm here for. I want to talk to you about why the Pine Tree Power Company makes more sense, more dollars and cents for the state of Maine, and in particular for a transition to clean energy. In order to get to clean energy, and I think of it as a full, fast, and fair transition to clean energy that we should all aspire to, we need to have a utility company that we can trust and rely on and afford. We need to make a fast transition to heat pumps and electric vehicles for all of us, and other forms of decarbonized, electrified, locally sourced energy. We need a transition where no one is left behind. And at the end of the day, we should be able to make a switch that leaves more money, not less, in the pockets of Maine people and Maine businesses, that lifts our communities up, that lifts our economy up, rather than dragging us down and extracting even more from a state which frankly is has a lot of history of extraction by others, from the great proprietors to the modern multinationals, right? We're used to being extracted from, but if we stand up for ourselves, we can actually make transitions and choices that make us all better off and create rising tides that lift all boats. So the Pine Tree Power question 3, which you will vote on, would create a company that serves most of Maine, but not all. That's a common misconception that it would be statewide, but there are 10 existing consumer utilities in Maine that already exist and will continue to exist. Central Maine Power and Versant Power are a slightly smaller for-profit utility that serves the northern and the eastern portions of this green bit. CMP serves sort of this part. Those 2 investor-owned utilities would be refinanced, and we would bring them back into local control, and it would be like a large cousin or sibling to these existing not-for-profit utilities, which have been around for a long time. Some background on utilities. They are like no other business. A utility is a monopoly by definition. It is not a free market. And that means the customers have no choice of who provides that utility service. It also means that customers have to pay their bills, or they'll get disconnected from a really critical public good. We all pay our bills, so there's essentially no risk in the utility world, unless you are really being fundamentally stupid. I don't know what other word to use. There's essentially no risk in putting capital investment into utility. That's why they've traditionally been thought of as a very safe and secure investment. Investor-owned utilities in the U.S. have increased their profits over the last 120 years steadily. And they've done that in part by winning court decisions all the way to the Supreme Court that says basically profits are based on investment. They're not really based on performance ever. They're also basically fundamentally based on what you put into the grid. You put in $1, you're going to get $2 or $3 back. And very importantly, maybe most importantly, that third bullet, we grant our public utilities a monopoly privilege. It is a privilege. They are there to deliver a public good. The monopoly, which no other business gets, is important to allow them to do that efficiently. But we can, in return, we can revoke that privilege at any time. This is a fundamental legal and constitutional principle of utility rate making. We, the public, can revoke the monopoly privilege. We are not truly captive because that is always our choice. It doesn't happen very often for reasons that we are seeing in all of the ads today. Utilities fight it because they don't want to lose a cash cow, but we can legally and constitutionally revoke that privilege at any time. I want to talk about my journey a little bit. I was elected, as Ed mentioned, to the legislature in 2006, and my number one motivator was the climate crisis. We knew Bill McKibben's book had come out in 1989. Al Gore's book came out in 1992. We knew that climate destabilization, climate emergency was upon us, even in 2006 when I ran for office, but we weren't doing enough. And that's what drove me to run. I had been, as many of you know, a public school educator. I feel very strongly about the importance of education. Glad to hear Ed mention it, and as part of the great work that Friends of Mary Meeting Bay does. But I wanted to work on this urgent problem and try to find urgent solutions. In my search for solutions, I looked around the country at where are the communities that are getting to 100% renewables first? Who's leading? What can we learn from them? And what I learned was that there are these 6 communities: Kodiak, Alaska, Rockport, Missouri, Georgetown, Texas, Greensburg, Kansas, a couple others that they were there first. By 2016, all of these had achieved 100% renewable electricity. And I thought to myself, well, that is very, very, very strange. 4 of these are in conservative areas. I thought conservatives were opposed to clean energy. I thought that, Republicans didn't like wind turbines and solar farms. What's going on here? Why are these the 6 communities that got to 100% renewables first? What do they have in common? Well, the only thing they have in common is that they are all served by nonprofit utilities, or utilities that are owned fundamentally by their customers. There are a couple different business models to that, but all of these, not coincidentally, are served by consumer-owned utilities. And realizing that and looking around at large utilities, which also have a disproportionate number of nonprofit consumer-owned utilities leading in the race to get to 100% energy independence, 100% clean energy, looking at example after example after example of where the leaders are these nonprofit utilities really woke me up to the transformative potential if we were to do something like this in Maine and expand on the existing utilities that we do have that I showed you on the map. Now let's talk about what switching to clean energy really means. It's not just wind turbines and solar farms and solar on your roof and more efficient energy. It's something much bigger and, frankly, much harder. We need to get people to make consumer choices. 54% of our emissions are from gas in your tank and diesel in your truck. 54% of Maine's emissions. That means we need to get people to switch to a different type of vehicle, like this electric vehicle that you see here. 54% of our emissions relate to a consumer choice. Think about that. 30% relate to a consumer choice to switch to heat pumps or some other, zero emission source of energy that gets people away from gas or heating oil. Industrial production, our manufacturing sector, is only 9% of our emissions. That also needs to electrify and decarbonize. And our current electrical use is actually relatively clean. So, it's not a big part of the problem. the problem is that we need to electrify. We need people to make choices, and we need the grid to be able to handle it. The electrical grid is the lifeline. It is not figuratively, but literally the lifeline to a livable planet. We will not get there without the grid. Your children, my children, our grandchildren will not have a livable planet if we do not have a grid, an electrical grid, poles and wires that we can afford, that we can rely upon, and that we can trust. Because remember, this is consumer choice. I don't think anybody's going to wave a magic wand and make a law that you have to have an electric vehicle. There is some work on that, but I hear pushback. It's very hard to make laws like that. 3 times more capacity. The grid will need to have 3 times more capacity. Actually, 3.5 times we expect the capacity to deliver electrons, to power our transportation fleet, to heat and cool our homes, to power our factories. That means a huge capital investment. We need it to be much more robust. And yes, also decentralized, which requires smarter decisions. But even with decentralization, we need the grid to be more robust. And by the way, to be hardened against extreme weather as well, which requires even more capital investment. There are 2 types of utilities. I've talked about them a little bit, but just to make it very clear, Central Maine Power is an investor-owned utility. These are called IOUs. I didn't make that up. This is what people in the regulatory world call them, IOUs. And consumer-owned utilities in Maine law are called COUs. It simply means that they're nonprofits and that they are locally controlled. Iberdrola is the owner of Avangrid, which is the owner of Central Maine Power. Central Maine Power's real priorities are determined in that skyscraper that you see on the left. The Iberdrola Tower in Bilbao, Spain, is where the board meets. The chairman of the board makes $14.7 million a year. Some of that comes from you. And they decide, that board that you did not elect, it was elected by shareholders, that you can't attend the meetings of, that you can't issue a freedom of access request against and find out what they're saying to each other. That board, not your local board that you chose, sets the priorities of the company. Do they run the grid? No. Boards don't run grids. So don't believe Central Maine Power that any board is ever going to run an electrical grid. That's not what a board does in any business. They hire professionals. Kennebunk Light and Power has a board, which is chosen by the good people of Kennebunk. The good people of Kennebunk can go to their meetings or watch their meetings or read the minutes. They can elect someone else if they don't like the choices they're making. And that board hires professionals to run the grid. They do a fantastic job, and they have local control. I've spoken about CMP's ownership a little bit, but I want to make this really, really clear. We do have 2 utilities in Maine. Versant Power on the left, serving northern and eastern parts of the grid, has its own captive customers. It is owned by NMAX USA, a holding company, which is primarily for tax advantages in the US. That in turn is owned by NMAX Canada, which is also a for-profit company. And NMAX is entirely owned by a foreign government. Let me say that again. NMAX, which owns our Versant Power, is owned by a foreign government, lock, stock, and barrel. The city of Calgary, which is the tar sands capital of the world, is the owner of this for-profit company. In Canada, it turns out you can do this. And I don't know too many examples in the US, but governments can form for-profits. Hydro-Quebec is another example, right? Which you may know about, of a government-owned for-profit. And this is the case for Versant. Now going to CMP, likewise, it has its own captive customers that have there's no free market competition. We don't choose their board, etc. CMP is owned by Avangrid, which is traded a little bit in the US, again, for tax purposes, tax advantages that the US gives to corporations. But 81.5% of their shares are owned by Iberdrola, which is based in that skyscraper in Spain. Iberdrola has many investors, but here are some of their largest investors. The number one investor of Iberdrola, clocking in at 10.8% of shares, far more than any other single investor, is the oil-rich government of Qatar, which is not a democracy, which has bribed EU officials, which has bribed FIFA officials for the World Cup, which has killed 5,000 migrant workers in building those stadiums in the desert. Qatar is the number one owner of Iberdrola, also a foreign government. And then Norway, another oil-rich sovereign wealth fund, another oil-rich government, is also a big owner of Iberdrola. BlackRock, which you may have heard of, it's been called the world's largest shadow bank, is another of the largest investors in Iberdrola, the largest owners. So these are the folks who are actually calling the shots, actually setting the priorities, actually running the grid. When you see CMP's scary ads about, oh my God, you don't want to have to choose politicians to run your grid. Oh, that would be terrible. Well, first of all, these are the people we're replacing. All the board will do that we choose is, for the Pine Tree Power Company, is replace this board of shareholders meeting in the top floor of the Iberdrola tower. And they will not run the day-to-day operations. We'll come back to that. What they will do is issue low-cost tax-exempt debt. The fundamental challenge of a utility is to come up with financing. We know what it takes to run poles and wires. It's not rocket science. You hire good engineers, certainly. You hire good lawyers, hopefully not too many. Sorry, John. I saw a lawyer or two on the call. But you finance your grid, and you have to come up with a lot of capital to finance the poles, the wires, the substations, the transformers, the high voltage transmission, et cetera, especially as we build it out. We need hundreds of millions of dollars of investment over the next few decades in our grid. We can do it this way on the left, which is how investor-owned utilities finance, or we can do it this way on the right. Investor-owned utilities mix in equity, which is the red portion, with taxable debt. You also pay their taxes. This is how our rates are determined for an investor-owned utility. And our rates for a consumer-owned utility are determined on the cost of capital, which is typically around 2 or 3%. It's tax-exempt debt, nothing more, nothing less. So you can either pay for investors very expensively and pay for taxable debt very expensively, or you can pay for tax-exempt debt and cut the equity investors out of the equation. By doing that, you'll pay about half as much, certainly in interest. Over 20 years, this $100 capital expense will become $200 or $300 that you pay back to investors, or it will become $130 or $140 that you pay to a revenue bond bank, which is simply lending you money against your future revenue. That translates to lower rates. Even before a recent increase in CMP and Versant's rates, the chart in Maine looked like this. CMP is the first bar. Versant is the next two bars. They are charging close to 30%. In fact, it now is 30% for Versant, 28% per kilowatt hour for CMP. These are residential rates. Eastern Maine Electric Cooperative, twice the size of Rhode Island, very rural, very expensive to serve, is charging less. Holton, Van Buren, Kennebunk, Madison, these main consumer-owned utilities are charging far less. In fact, it's less than half what CMP and Versant are charging. Their delivery rates are lower, which is very important because that is the part they're primarily responsible for. And we can do better. The proof is in the pudding here in Maine and also in other parts of the country. Because guess what? 28% of Americans get their energy now from a consumer-owned utility. 28%. That's more than 1 in 4 residents of the United States. Ironically, it's mostly in the conservative heartland, the most rural, sparsely populated parts of the country. And you see in Maine, that area that's Eastern Maine Electric Cooperative. This is the area served by they were called originally farmer-owned cooperatives because the investor-owned utilities just weren't getting there. It was like broadband is today. You know, the for-profits weren't interested in serving the very rural, sparsely settled areas. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt came along and created the REA. You see the picture there. That's from a poster of that era. And the countryside was finally electrified. To this day, these cooperatives are beloved by their largely conservative customer owners, and they're doing amazing work, really incredible work, including a lot of leadership in broadband and in climate. There's also public power, which is, or municipal utilities. Maybe you're familiar with the Brunswick Sewer and Water District, or the Bodenham Water District, or Portland Water District. Water's a little more consumer owned, but Kennebunk Light and Power, Madison Electric, Holton Water Company serving electric. These are Maine public power, Maine municipal utilities, and they have lower rates, 13% lower as of the year in which this study was done. Half the outages, half as many minutes without power per year. And we want to create a municipal utility. That's what the Pine Tree Power Company would be. So you can expect, based on averages, lower rates and fewer outages with the Pine Tree Power Company. You also can expect better customer satisfaction, which is it's really important. It's hard to overstate the importance of customer satisfaction. When you want people to switch to an electric vehicle, or if we want people to switch to a heat pump, they need to trust the utility. Consumer-owned utilities like the Electric Power Board of Chattanooga, or Clark Public Utilities, or the Salt River Project, these municipal and state-owned utilities are at the top of the chart for customer satisfaction. Year after year, it's largely these nonprofit utilities at the top of the chart. And if you go down from, you know, utility number 1 through 5, all the way down to utility number 121, you will find Central Maine Power. Year after year after year, CMP has had the worst customer satisfaction ratings in the nation, bar none, even worse than Pacific Gas and Electric, which killed 85 people and was convicted of felonies for doing so in the Paradise fires, the Camp Fire a few years ago. Versant, our other investor-owned utility in Maine, is also at the bottom year after year after year. This is not helpful, but it's also true that this is a pattern. It's not just them. Investor-owned utilities do poorly when it comes to customer satisfaction. That's important if we want to switch to those EVs and heat pumps, right? So let's remind ourselves, we're not talking about generation. We're talking about the Pine Tree Power Company buying the grid, this monopoly system of poles and wires, which connects us to each other and connects us to our power sources. The customers, not the state, will own the grid. No tax dollars are used. A private operations team of 10 to 12 people will be contracted to do the day-to-day management. And they're the folks who are going to be really, you know, running the grid, if you will. But policies will be set by the board that we get to elect. Again, this is the current org chart for CMP and Versant. We've already talked about it. The org chart will flip. So customers, instead of being at the bottom, are going to be at the top. The customers, you, me, our businesses, will really call the shots and set the policies through 2 channels. We will still have the governor and legislature and the PUC and the public advocate who do provide some degree of oversight now. But instead of that skyscraper in Spain, you'll have a board that we elect, 7 elected members. They choose 6 experts to help round out the board, 13-member board altogether, staggered terms, clean elections, nonpartisan elections. There's no primary. It's just anybody can run, and then there's a ranked choice runoff, similar to county elections. And they hire a small staff. They hire a CEO, a CFO, legal counsel, and that small staff oversees the contracting, the RFP, and the performance, day-to-day performance of the private sector operations team. Again, 10 to 12 people who will come in, operate the company day-to-day, using the same workers, using the same bucket trucks, using the same customer service centers, using the same dispatch centers that we have now for CMP and Versant. The workers are kept on with a retention bonus. We want them to stay because they're the people who really know what's happening on the ground, right? So we, the customer owners, are at the top, but we really put workers first in this equation too. And more money stays in Maine, as well as control. Again, this is a company that just serves the green portions of the state. Benefits financially stay in Maine. We're not pumping money out to pay for that expensive shareholder equity. You have consumer control from that board, and the workers are retained and benefit. We improve reliability in two ways. We redirect a portion of the savings to invest in the grid, improve reliability, and we also have a company that now can actually favor solar, that can support policies like net metering, which CMP has always been very, very opposed to, and help us to get to a more decentralized grid, support efficiency as well, because there won't be a profit motive to use more electrons wastefully, so that we can pay for a multi-million-dollar CEO salary in Spain. Resilience means having a more efficient, more decentralized grid, as well as investing more in hardening the grid that we do have. We get to lower cost primarily through the displacement of expensive shareholder equity with that low-cost tax-exempt debt that I mentioned. Utilities simply borrow against their future revenue. It's how they are financed, so it's not rocket science. You don't need tax dollars because you've got a steady income. It's like if you had the most secure job in the world and you were making really good money, could you get a mortgage? Yes, you could. Right? And could you get good interest rates? Yes, you could. And the same is true here with utilities. Revenue bond banks love to lend to utilities. And we've spoken with many. They say that, yes, Pine Tree Power will have a great bond rating and will be able to achieve incredibly attractive, low interest, tax exempt terms in the order of 2 or 3%. That's how we get to $9 billion in savings. Dr. Richard Silkman did a study, and I'll come to that in a moment. But it's the savings increase over time after the 30 years that you see modeled here, where we do save incrementally $9 billion. Then we have paid off the grid. So imagine what happens to this line after you've paid completely for that mortgage, right? You own the grid, like as if you own just like when you pay off your mortgage and own your home. Then the savings start to accrue even more rapidly. I won't get into the amortization calculator too much, except to say that if you're paying for a large sum of money, like $13.5 billion over 20 years at a high interest rate, you pay a lot more in interest than if you pay for that same amount with a lower interest rate. This is the interest alone on this $13.5 billion example would be 3 times as much, 16.7 billion as opposed to 5.3 billion. If you amortize a loan of 13.5 billion over 20 years at 9.5 versus 3.5%. So this isn't just theory, though. We've actually really done the homework. In 2019, I sponsored a bill that would have moved forward with a refinancing of the grid, just like the Pine Tree Power Company. The Maine Public Utilities Commission conducted a study. They they spent $500,000 on independent analysis by a group called the London Economics International. LEI came back almost a year later, having really studied it carefully, with a long report. It's online if you're interested, saying essentially 3 things. It is legal, it is constitutional, and it will likely save us money. They used very conservative assumptions. I disagree with many of them, but they still found net savings over 30 years, even as we pay off the cost of the acquisition. I don't understand why there are still policymakers in the state that are saying this can be expensive. Even the PUC's own consultant said that it will save us money. We also got some good feedback from London Economics on improving the bill. So a bill that I sponsored the year after that report was improved. It has many of those improvements in the referendum now. That bill passed the House and Senate with bipartisan majorities. That is unprecedented. Maine has actually made the history books by achieving that. Sadly, our governor wasn't convinced. She's very close with the lobbyists for the utilities. And this felt like one bridge too far for her. So she vetoed it. 80,000 signatures were gathered by volunteers. And that's why in 27 days, or tomorrow for that matter, you get to vote on the Pine Tree Power proposal. Question 3. London Economics said, using their conservative assumptions, that there might be a slight uptick in rates at first, but that we would save money continuously after that, and then pay off the mortgage, and then savings increase even more. Economist named Dr. Richard Silkman, who you may recall from the incredible grid solar work that he did in Booth Bay, showing savings through solar. Dr. Richard Silkman did an analysis of LEI's assumptions and said, no, actually, there's more savings from transmission. There's more savings from management. You forgot that FEMA, well, actually, he didn't mention this, but FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, also pays for our disasters if we have a consumer-owned utility. There's even more savings. But Silkman changed some of the assumptions, and he said, no, LEI, you got it wrong. There will be savings from day one. You see the blue bars going down. That's Dr. Silkman's reprojection of the same chart that you saw a moment ago. So LEI said this. Silkman said, no, look at the blue lines. We will see savings from day one. They will continue downward. I agree with that part, but they'll continue downward more quickly. So this is where Silkman and Dr. Dick Woodbury and Dr. David Vail agree with him. All Maine-based economists, Harvard and Yale PhDs. Nobody paid them for their opinion. This is where they're saying, no, we will save money from day one, and it will accumulate to $9 billion over the first 30 years, and then accelerate from there. So think about your children, think about your grandchildren. Do you want them to be handed over a utility to which they are captive, where they're paying higher, the 5th highest rates in the nation, the worst reliability, et cetera, or to own a grid and have lower rates in the future? That's important for climate because we need to electrify to decarbonize. What about case studies? Has this been done before? Yes, it has. And yes, it's been a success. Everywhere that it has happened, the utilities have advertised massively against it. And if people voted yes, then they succeeded. Messina, New York voted yes in 1981. Rates dropped immediately by a quarter, despite the scare tactics of the utilities. They paid it off. Today, they have some of the cheapest and cleanest electricity in the state. The union workers are doing better. This is a utility up near the Canadian border, very forested, very wintry. They have incredible reliability. And people who were opposed to it, like Ernie LaBaff, who is a now 90-year-old labor leader, are some of the biggest fans and say things like, you can't beat what they're getting in Messina. Winter Park, Florida did this in 2005. The vote was in 2003. It took only 2 years to negotiate and litigate the acquisition value, to make the change. Only 2 years. And despite the scare tactics, they did in fact repay the acquisition costs in under 10 years. The ads were wrong. They increased reliability. The ads were wrong about that too. In fact, they've undergrounded all of the lines. And that means that when there's a hurricane, the lights in Winter Park are on when everyone else's in the area are off. So Winter Park, Florida. How about Jefferson County, Washington? They voted after a scary ad campaign. They said, nope, we're going to take back our power anyway, big investor-owned utility. We're buying you out. 2008, this is a very rural, forested region in Washington state. And Jefferson County, Washington has since then lowered rates, especially for lower income households. They've increased job creation and earnings for employees, and they've moved towards clean energy. Boulder, Colorado voted to do this and ultimately pressed pause because the large multi-state utility called XL that they were angry with, came to them and made a deal. They said, well, I tell you what, we'll get you to 100% clean energy by 2030, which is your number one goal. And by the way, we have decided that we're going to switch from 97% fossil fuels to 80% renewables by 2030. So Boulder achieved something really massive. They not only decarbonized their own grid, but they also applied leverage and pressure to a multi-state utility that made massive changes because of the pressure that was exerted. So leverage is important in this conversation as well. We remind investor-owned utilities by talking about this, we remind them that the monopoly is a privilege and they better shape up or else they better ship out. That's what Boulder achieved. They shaped up their utility by threatening to ship them out. Long Island, New York did this in 1998. It wasn't perfect, but rates went down by 20%, and they've stayed lower than the neighboring utilities ever since. They also, after Superstorm Sandy, were the recipients of $898 million in FEMA assistance, which if they had been an investor-owned utility like CMP, the ratepayers would have had to pay the costs of restoring after that storm. That's true after every large storm. FEMA can help you if you are a consumer-owned nonprofit utility. Otherwise, you pay for it yourself. Nebraska switched in the 1940s and went to consumer-owned utilities statewide. Today, they have they're typically in the best 3 states for lowest rates. They have the fewest outages, and they have lots of tornadoes there, so that is an achievement. They also are the only red or Republican state in the United States that has any kind of net zero goal. That is a goal that didn't come from the politicians in the state house or the governor. Remember, this is a Republican state. It was actually the elected board members of the utility, which CMP is telling you are going to be terrible people, who are probably backed by gas and oil interests. Well, Nebraska actually proves that not to be the case necessarily. The board members voted themselves to get to net zero by 2050. And again, the only red state to have that kind of a goal. Really a remarkable set of accomplishments in Nebraska. Nearing the end of the case studies, but internet access is also helped when you have a nonprofit consumer-owned utility. You can allow fiber to be attached to the poles and wires more affordably because the cost of the poles and wires is passed on to all pole attachers. That's an important thing. In Maine alone, we have tens of thousands of homes that lack internet access at a reasonable speed for kids to do their schoolwork, for people to be able to work from home, for people to be able to talk to each other like we're doing now. Chattanooga is one of many electric utilities that are nonprofit that chose to solve the broadband challenge by leveraging their pole and wire network, by leveraging their billing relationship with every customer, every resident and business in the city, and deploying very high speed, very affordable fiber across the entire city. And it's been a huge economic boon to Chattanooga. Rural cooperatives are doing the same thing in the South and in the Midwest. So there is a connection to broadband here. I'm going to wrap this up with a couple of quick reminders. CMP and Versant are giving Maine the most frequent outages of all 50 states. They're putting businesses out of business. This carpenter went out of business because he couldn't pay for his electricity. Having the 5th highest rates is not a good way to attract businesses, especially manufacturers. And having the worst customer satisfaction in the nation, bar none, both from businesses and from residential customers, is a terrible, terrible thing if you hope to convince people to switch to electricity for their power, to get away from fossil fuels and to switch to electric vehicles, to switch to heat pumps, to switch to other forms of clean electrical energy. Again, the grid is the lifeline, and we need to be able to trust it and afford it and rely on it. But right now, I think if Mainers were given a choice, if there were actual free market competition, Versant and CMP would not be in business. And that is a pretty good indicator that it is time for them to ship out. They've had a chance to shape up. They've failed again and again, and it is time for them to ship out. We can do better, far better, with the Pine Tree Power Company. And Bill McKibben will be coming to Maine on Saturday to speak at a Get Out the Vote rally in Portland at the Unitarian Universal Church. All of you are welcome. Bill McKibben, again, wrote the book on climate change in 1989, warning us that the climate crisis was upon us, warning us that we needed to do better. Unfortunately, we have not done anywhere near enough. But he's convinced that we need to do this. And he says, in our efforts to save our climate, the hour is late and the need is urgent. Maine's proposal for a consumer-owned utility offers a model for transforming a nation and a world, seeking solutions to the crisis of our era. People from across the state have given $15, $25, 15 hours, 25 hours. They've given their time and their treasure to make this happen. Thousands of Mainers have done so over the last 5 years. 80,000 signatures were collected. The ad campaign is upon us. People are waking up to this conversation that some of us have been having for years now. We have 27 days to win, and we can win. This can happen. And the eyes of the nation are upon us here in Maine. If we vote yes between now and November 7th, Maine will accomplish something that is transformative for our climate, that brings down the cost of clean electricity for all Maine residents, including our most vulnerable, and that allows us to provide a guiding light to others around the country. You know, we've done some good things with the Biden and Mills administrations, but it's not enough. Everything together that Biden and Mills have done is not enough to meet the minimum of our climate commitments to the Paris Agreement. The US is failing to meet its commitments to the Paris Agreement. And that's bad because the Paris Agreement isn't even enough to prevent a lot of catastrophic damage. We need to do more, and Maine has this opportunity in the next 27 days. I want to share with you, if I can, an ad, and you're going to tell me if you can hear it. This is someone you may recognize. He lives in Bodenham. Martin, give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
Yeah, we can't hear it, Seth.
You can?
Cannot.
Okay. All right. Well, I tried. So this is an ad with a fellow who worked for CMP for 40 years. He is telling you that he supports this because it's not about the customers, it's about the profits. He's telling you that in his work as a union leader for CMP, that he believes that it is time, sorry, that's another ad. He believes that it is time to change things and to move to a consumer-owned utility for Maine. So that's Clint Smith. We want to get him in front of people on their TV screen, on their internet. And we can do that with donations, but only if people donate at pinetreepower.org. We have other ads. You can hear from this very nice Franco couple from Lewiston who have a story about CMP and why their rates are way too high and why we need to make a switch but these ads are not getting seen because CMP is outspending us 40, 50, 60 to 1. And so people volunteering and people donating can make a difference in that. I'm going to wrap it up with a quick timeline. This will take 4 years to implement. It doesn't happen overnight, but if we vote yes now, then by the fall of 2027, we will have a Pine Tree Power Company that we can trust and depend on and afford. And you can help not only by voting yes, but also by signing up to volunteer. And probably the quickest way is just go to pinetreepower.org, where it says donate at pinetreepower.org. You can also take action and volunteer in other ways. And I'm going to end it there, turn it back to Ed, and I'm happy in the time remaining to answer any questions that you may have, and I'll try to be quick.
Great. Thank you so much, Seth. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, yeah, that's an awesome presentation. I really appreciate it. There are a number of questions here so far in the chat zone, and I've got one to start. I'm interested to know, and your last slide touched on this, but obviously you're being outspent in a huge way. What are your plans? Do you have anybody going door to door canvassing now? You know, in at least in the more urban areas, Portland, Lewiston. I also read somewhere that most Republicans tend to support CNP, and Democrats are probably split. It's a tough battle. How are you guys addressing that? Both of those.
Yeah,
those
people are volunteering. I think a lot of people are just waking up to the what's happening and wanting to do more. So by going to pinetreepower.org, you can click on Take Action, which gives you options to volunteer. You can go door to door. I'll be going on Thursday afternoons in Bath, for example. We're doing some canvases. I would like to do some in the Bodenham and Richmond area as well. We've been canvassing across the state, though: Waterville, Bangor, Portland, you name it. Phone banking, text banking, donating is very helpful because we do have an ad asymmetry. And yes, Republicans are somewhat more apt to trust Pine Tree Power, but to trust Central Maine Power. But when you remind them that foreign governments own the grid now, and that the reason we have question 2, which is an effort to stop foreign governments from spending on referendum campaigns, they start to scratch their head a little bit and to think differently. So I highly recommend talking to your Republican friends about foreign governments owning Central Maine Power, owning Versant Power, spending virtually unlimited money to try to keep us as a cash cow, where we have no free market choice whatsoever. Republicans can understand this. And I'm very proud that we had a bipartisan majority in Augusta when this was a bill. I'm convinced that we will get a share of the Republican vote, and also many independents and most Democrats. We need to do that. And the way we do that is with your help.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Seth. I'll point out that while you're talking about just transmission here, but I'm not sure that all the people on this call know that virtually all of our generation is also coming from foreign governments, and all the generation in the state it's either coming from Hydro-Quebec, which is government owned, or it's the major hydro producers in the state are South African Pulp and Paper or Brookfield, a Canadian company. So I hope that this passes, and it's a first step, because I think we ought to own our own generation as well. Question here from Dave Hedricks: what can be done if question 1 passes? Could you refresh for people what question 1 is and how that might affect this?
Yeah, question 1 would essentially require that consumer-owned utilities in general in the future, if they want to borrow $1 billion or more to invest in their infrastructure, will be subjected to a statewide vote of approval or disapproval. Now, these, again, they're not tax dollars. That consumer-owned utilities do not use tax dollars. Pine Tree Power is forbidden from using tax dollars. But CMP put question 1 on the ballot in hopes that it would help to trip up the implementation of Pine Tree Power if question 3 does pass. So if we vote yes on question 3, but question 1 passes, they think they might get a second bite of the apple to defeat it. I'm not overly concerned about that. I don't think I'll be voting yes on 1. I think my votes will be no on 1 and yes on all other questions, 2 through 8. So yes on 1 and no on 1 and yes on the rest. That's my plan. I haven't voted yet, but no on 1, yes on the rest. But I don't think that question 1 will be a huge obstacle if it does ultimately pass. One reason for that is that question 2 is very likely to pass. Question 2 will prevent CMP and Versant's government owners from spending money to buy our elections. So by voting yes on 2 and yes on 3, you can keep these foreign governments out of our elections and also out of our critical energy infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. A good friend of mine, a good Democrat, was saying she would vote no on question 3 because the legal stuff that would ensue and the costs that would involve. Could you? And that's what this person, Palmer Sargent here, asks that question. Could you address that? Who will finance the legal battle? All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's a common misconception. Investor-owned utilities buy each other all the time, and the transaction costs are significant. You do need lawyers. This will be no different in that regard, but the legal costs and the legal timeline are modeled in the PUC's own study. Remember, the PUC did this feasibility analysis, and they came back saying it would save us money. The transaction costs are included in that. As to the how long this drags on, we saw in the examples that I gave, the case studies, that the utilities threatened to make it take a long time. They threatened to, break the dishes on the way out of the kitchen, but they weren't able to do that. In each of the cases where communities believed in themselves, believed that they could, in fact, take back their power, they did so successfully in 2 years, 4 years. London Economics, the PUC's consultant, said this would take 4 years and it would save us money. That includes a transaction cost. So, I don't know how more plainly I can put it, Ed, but there are a lot of scare tactics being used by the utilities. I think that it's unfortunate that good Democrats have been led astray in that regard. A lot of that is, frankly, by the ability of these utilities to hire Democratic political operatives, Democratic lobbyists, and even former Democratic elected officials from, former legislative colleagues of mine, all the way up to John Baldacci, to sort of, participate in the gravy train and, help to influence other Democrats to vote against their own interests. It's unfortunate, but it is the reality we live with today.
Okay, thank you. Someone here, Charles asks, going green is a great idea. How will Pine Tree pay for it? It won't come cheap. And I've got to say that every time I hear or read an article or hear an ad for electric vehicles and people getting excited about it, I just have in my head a vision of Central Maine Power rubbing their hands together because they're going to make more money out of this. Because in my analysis, I said electric vehicles, but I was thinking of heat pumps. In my analysis, heat pumps are using about double the amount. They've doubled my electric bill. They're using a lot. They're energy hogs. And I say that because I'm off the grid now, but I had solar for 20 something years. And it doesn't, I can't do it because I don't have the capacity. I'd have to double my array to have a heat pump here. So we're talking about, in the case of, I think, heat pumps and electric vehicles, often a lot more power generation or requirements for power generation. And I'm not sure we're really addressing the conservation piece. In theory, the electric replaces the coal, but I'm not sure that it's not additive often. And again, hey, let's go out and get an EV, let's go out and get a heat pump. Well, where's that energy coming from? And I think, if we can do it through solar, maybe wind, some of these things, we're sort of, that's what we need to think about, because as you probably know, hydro, which we're so dependent on, is not very green, particularly big hydro. Huge methane producer, huge problems for the fish. And so, yeah, it gives me, as someone who's fairly knowledgeable about this, a lot of things to think about. But going green, back to the question here, going green is a great idea. How will Pine Tree pay for it? It won't come cheap.
I think the question is a really important one, because it's true. Going green is not as simple as some people want, as we all would like it to be, right? It would be wonderful if we could solve the existential climate emergency by snapping our fingers and by electing, Democrats. But I'm here to tell you, as a Democratic elected for 7 terms, that ain't anywhere near enough. We need to do a lot more than we are doing now. As I mentioned earlier, you put together the Mills administration's goals and the Biden administration's goals. It's not enough to get us to our at a minimum our Paris Agreement commitments. There's a lot of greenwashing in the corporate space, and there's a ton of greenwashing in the political space. We have to do more. So it starts with smart economic decisions. It starts with having a grid, which really is the primary way that we will decarbonize, if not the only way. A grid that we can afford and depend on and trust to deliver our power. I think the economics, to anyone that was listening and followed along, should be clear. If you want to simplify it, we're going to keep $187 million a year in profits that are leaving the state and the country in the state. Every year we send 187 million out of the state and out of the country to the investors, the foreign government investors of CMP. That's more than they pay their workers combined. All the workers of CMP combined make less than what they're taking out of the state in profits. And we have a choice. We've looked at these other areas that have done this. We've looked at the other parts of the country that already have consumer ownership, and their rates are half as high, and their reliability is twice as good. This should be falling off a log easy. And the primary risk, I will say, no course of action has, complete certainty, but staying with CMP and Versant, the worst utilities in the country, is the worst thing we could possibly do, right? It as Clint Smith, the utility worker in the ad that I wanted to show you, likes to say, it is broke. You know how they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, it's broke, and it's time to fix it. That's how Clint puts it in the ad. And going green is going to be challenging, but it starts with having a network that we can afford, and it will encourage efficiency, because efficiency is the cheapest and the greenest form of energy. That encourages rooftop solar, that encourages good decisions about energy use, and doesn't have perverse incentives to get you to use more power. CMP and Versant's foreign investors don't care if we get to clean energy. They care if their shareholders are doing well. So if the transition is very expensive, that's good for them. That's what they want. But it's the opposite of helpful in getting to our goals.
Yeah, they have a disincentive to save money. So, yeah. And
Charles, I answered the question in the presentation, and I'm happy to talk about economics with you offline. But if you borrow at 9%, you're going to pay twice as much as if you borrow at 3%. It boils down to that.
Great. I think that looks like that's pretty much all the questions, I think. Someone asked about the Clean Election Fund, but I didn't hear you mention that. Maybe you did and I missed it.
Yeah. The board will be elected using clean elections. They have the option to the 7 members that we elect will have the option to use clean elections. Clean elections is a really powerful system in Maine that allows us to elect officials who are not beholden to special interests. CMP is one of the worst spenders on lobbying and on campaigns, on political campaigns in Augusta. I was able to run using clean elections, and it really helped me to make decisions where I knew that I was listening to my constituents and only my constituents. We have never elected a clean elections governor, sadly. I hope that there will become a day when clean elections is robust enough to elect a governor, but right now it's not. We can elect this board with clean elections, and that will be very helpful in getting us to where we need to be.
As this person suggests, they thought the Clean Elections Fund was only for state legislative races. So how are we electing this consumer board with that money?
It's part of the legislation. So
Okay.
if you, I'm going to recommend a very, very helpful voter guide to everyone that still has questions. And it is from the Secretary of State's website. I'll call it up while I'm talking.
And maybe you can type it into the chat or
That
something.
that voter guide allows you to read the nonpartisan summary of the legislation and what it does. It also allows you to read the actual legislative language, which includes provisions like clean elections will be available to the 7 board members. The goal of the utility will be to meet or exceed our climate goals and to help with broadband. The new Pine Tree Power Company is not allowed to use tax dollars, can only finance itself by borrowing against its future rates. It needs to bring down our rates and it needs to improve our reliability. That's in there as well. But click on the link I just posted in the chat and scroll down to, I recommend that you start on page 28, I think it is. Let me just double check. That is a very helpful voter guide, and it's actually for all 8 questions. So it will help you to decide about all of the 8 questions that are on our ballot this year. Page 31 is where the summary begins for the question number 3. I highly recommend going to page 31, reading that, reading the next portion after that, that's on pages 33 to 36 as well. So page 31 to page 36. Please do check that out because that will give you a lot of detail that I was not able to include in the presentation today.
Okay, and that's from the Secretary of State, I see. So,
That's right.
what are your thoughts on the $13.5 billion estimate that CMP keeps throwing out there? Halfway realistic at all, or not?
It's baloney. I mean, they paid a consultant to come up with that number, and they keep repeating it. Even the consultant said, you know, what they did was they doubled the actual book value of the 2 utilities. They pushed the acquisition out 10 years, and basically, you know, we're using, you know, $33 to further inflate that number. And even then, they said up to 13.5 billion. Now, the truth is, the utilities file their net worth right now. They have to, and they report it to FERC and they report it to the PUC. The actual value that they report is less than half, close to a third of the number that they're throwing around in their ads. You know, it's not going to be cheap to purchase the grid, but it will save us money immediately because we're refinancing it. Again, refinancing it at a lower cost. Every dollar they're worth now increases your rates. And it does it because you're paying them back for that dollar plus another dollar, maybe even 2 more dollars. That's how our rates are made in the United States. It's what the Supreme Court of the United States has decided our rates need to be based on, capital expenditures. And so it's not like regulators can even, you know, change that. If you have an investor-owned utility, you are choosing to pay a higher amount for every dollar that's put into the grid. So refinancing at a lower cost allows us to achieve that savings from day one. And the more they're worth, frankly, the more that we will save. Because again, that's how our rates are made.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Seth. Let's wrap it up. I'll remind folks to join us next month if you can for endangered species. And maybe the parting word should be, aside from thanks again, it's broke, so let's fix it.
There you go. All right. I'll put the website in the chat one more time. Please do grab that in the website for the Secretary of State's voter guide as well, because those are going to be really helpful resources to you as you vote, as you think about, you know, what you want to, how you want to exercise your very, very important say in things over the course of the next 27 days. And if you can volunteer, go to that Pine Tree Power website and click on Take Action. If you can donate, click on Contribute. And thanks again, everyone. It's great to be with you all. Maine has an incredible opportunity, and we're all a part of it.
Great. Thanks so much, Seth. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming too.
Thank you for being friends of Merry Meeting Bay, a great organization.
Thank you.